right, we're back. I want to. I was going to just talk about generic news stories here, and I wanted to touch on Egypt, but I think it's more important that we understand the true implications of this idea of why we seem to have such a fracture in our understanding of what differentiates a Republican from a Democrat, and why everyone's operating under the delusion that these parties actually represent us in some way, shape, or form. I ended the last segment by talking about how, for whatever reason, the minority populations, and I'm talking about racial minorities here in the United States, for whatever reason, flock to this democratic idealism. But, they're just as quick to subjugate you as anyone and everything else, in the sense that they're enslaving our population and in debt and in victimization or victimhood. And, the idea of a republic that protects you down to the level of the smallest minority of one is really the applicable idea here that every one of us needs to thoroughly and fully understand. So when I say that, realize that without a republic, slaves in the United States back in the 1860s or prior to 1860 would still be slaves. Maybe not. I mean, social mores may have changed by then, but my point is this. For years, for the 125 years before that, slavery was acceptable here. And the majority kept it that way. What happens when this majority concept backfires on you and they turn around and do something that you disagree with? I mean, now what do you do? Because, here's the example is that the fire has now escaped your control. And you can't put it out. It's like throwing a rock, and once it leaves your hand, you have no control over it. If you threw wrong in the first place, it's going off on a different trajectory than you anticipated it was going to go. And instead of hitting the tree, it hits a window and breaks it. Does damage. And that is where I fear we are headed with this political adherence to a philosophy or an ideology that is, for all intents and purposes, more damaging than the principles of freedom. Why are people fighting for their own enslavement, their own fiscal enslavement, their own debt enslavement, their own enslavement by the free goodies that they get as a result of their vote? I mean, I got to imagine that the most, cynical supporter of the liberal thinking recognizes that by that support they're hurting themselves. I mean, not everybody, I get it. Some of the people are just, so intellectually dishonest they'll never get it. But there's got to be those out there who are sitting there saying, man, by my accepting this free stuff, which, I want, I'm also putting myself in a position where I'm becoming a victim of that which I actually benefit from. But at some point, the music stops and everybody's got to find a chair, and there's just never going to be enough chairs to go around. At some point, folks, we're going to run out of other people's money. Where do we go from there? Then what happens? Because the dependence level is so high, and the dependence is so ingrained, that the shock of the culture change, the shock of the societal change, will be so extreme, so extravagant, so enormous, that many won't be able to handle it. That's a frightening concept. I mean, there are a million things that could happen that don't even require a government intervention to cause this kind of calamity. In fact, we've seen them. Think of Katrina. How many people died in Katrina? Now, one of the reasons that Katrina was such a tragedy is because everyone, instead of helping themselves, were doing what they were told and were so dependent on outside assistance that they had lost their ability to be self-reliant and self-sufficient. Now, I get it. I mean, you're sitting on the roof of your house. There's not a boat in sight. There's only so much self-reliance you can have, right? I mean, you can't swim 20 miles. But let's talk about the people who, the thousands upon thousands upon thousands who went to that arena and lived in those squalid conditions for how long? They had no food prepared. They had no water. They didn't even have bathroom facilities. I dare say that there were some folks that weren't in that environment, but were still victims of the storm, that were self-reliant enough to survive, irrespective of the loss of basic services of electricity and communications and flowing water and such. So, for the minority population in this country, at whatever color, whatever political, stripe you believe in, whatever the other creed issues are, right? Race, religion, sexual orientation, etc. You all consider yourselves minorities. Each of those minorities, by their dependence on government for their livelihood and existence, quite honestly, are laying the foundation for complete and utter devastation when something that is unplanned and unexpected comes along. I mean, let's just take the scenario of a natural disaster that is stunning in its scope and it's national. I mean, we get a solar flare that shuts off, creates an EMP that runs across the country and knocks power out for years. I mean, we hear about these warnings from experts all the time in the grid system because they say that these transformers that are in our country take 3 years to manufacture, and we don't manufacture them here in the United States anymore. So we'd have to first pray and hope that no other country was hit, and secondarily, we'd have to wait 3 years for them to manufacture them, and then somehow or other transport them over here when we don't have fuel, and we don't have any way to get fuel out of the ground because we don't have any electricity, and blah, 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 blah. I mean, we're talking about the end of civilization as we know it kind of scenarios. So what are you going to do then? How are you going to feed yourself? How are you going to feed your children? How are you going to grow a garden when you think it's acceptable or necessary for the government to provide for you? And the government won't be able to provide for itself, much less you. And I can tell you that in the pecking order of things, you're definitely at the bottom of that list. I mean, the average citizen is not going to get food. Your Congress people are, their aides and staff, the administrative leaders, there's preparation set aside for them. What about you? You've lost your ability to, for all intents and purposes, be self-reliant, grow your own food, know how to survive in a cold environment where there is no natural gas or electricity to keep you warm. You live in an environment that there's no firewood, there's no open ground on which to grow a garden, and quite frankly, if you tried to grow a garden, the community would probably rob it before you got a chance to bring it to maturity and eat it. Because everybody's going to be hungry. That scenario, while it may be extreme in its way of thinking, I don't think it is, but some people would say so. So let's just take their scenario and say, okay, it's extreme in its way of thinking. But it still outlines the exact problem that comes from over-dependency on government. And it still shows you that the Democratic mantra, and quite frankly, the Republican mantra, promote your dependency upon whom? Them. That's why my position here is that every American should stop ideologically supporting, promoting, and engendering these parties and should start saying what's in the best interest of the country, not the party. Because the party's only interest is its continuation and strength in growth, not your strength in growth. I mean, ultimately, it only contacts you and seeks your input when it wants something from you. Both parties do the same thing. Your congressman comes to visit for a speech when he wants your allegiance. But the rest of the time, you couldn't reach him with a 10-foot pole. He doesn't care. She doesn't want to hear from you. You're a nuisance, a pain in the rear end. You're not welcome. They only want to hear from you when you can deliver something they need. That, by its very definition, puts you in the position of chattel, an owned object. I mean, it should be clear to everyone. And Chris Christie, in his drive to achieve his personal egotistical goal of becoming the President of the United States and leading the party. I mean, come on. Do you really believe that Chris Christie thinks... let me put it to you this way. Do you think that he is not motivated by his own personal drive and his own dream of becoming the President of the United States? I mean, really. And what fosters that dream? I mean, it's not really a desire to benefit those under you. I mean, at this stage in the game, we have to admit that not a single president in modern history, or even probably not modern history, has gotten into the presidency for the wrong reasons. I mean, the only one I can think of is George Washington, who adamantly didn't want the job. I mean, he really didn't. He didn't want the job. Now, we've had plenty of presidents who've tried to act as if they didn't want the job and were accepting it just because everybody's saying I have to. But let's be candid. We know that's not the truth. We know that those people are only giving us a theatrical presentation of what they wish us to see. Chris Christie is willing to allow the means to justify, or the ends to justify the means. That whole idea is very antithetical to the principles of liberty and freedom. When you start thinking like that, the idea of, consequentialism, or the idea of consequences don't matter, the dangerous part of that is that they're willing to sell their principles out in an effort to obtain the power to reinstate their principles. I don't know, I don't think anybody is fooled by that. I mean, really, you can't sit and say that I'm going to rob that bank, which is a wrong, so that I can buy a car which I need to go to work, so I can feed my family, which is the good. Not and be intellectually honest. And that's where I think the problem comes from. Both parties are guilty. What really concerns me is that Chris Christie has this as a mantra. I mean, when he says things like, I'm going to do what it takes to win, let's hark back to the statements that Barack Obama made when he talked about his candidacy, when he said, we're 3 days away from fundamentally changing America, and no one quite understood the true implication of those words. So I invite you to be critical in your thinking skills and your listening skills, and listen to Chris Christie and Rand Paul and anyone else who's going to be running in this election, including Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden or whoever is going to throw their names into the ring. Because what you have to do is you have to be cognizant enough to see and pick those kinds of things out and then make a determination. Does that mean what I think it means? I'm here to tell you that I believe that party politics, both sides, has been the downfall of the foundational principles of our country. And I say that with pretty strong conviction, because they're not leading us along the path of liberty any longer and freedom. They're leading us along the path of do what's right or do for the party because that's what's right. And that is the end justifies the means, and that's never a principle upon which freedom and liberty can be built. There's no integrity in that. There's no honor in that. When you try to use that kind of justification, all that ends up happening is that you are willing to sacrifice your ethics, your morals, your integrity to achieve a goal that will allow you to, reinstate your integrity, ethics, and morals? I mean, that just doesn't make sense. That's why and I talked about it yesterday, where I say that we need citizen legislators to rise up in this country and say, we're not part of a party. We're patriots. We're individuals. And the party, and I get it, there's no money in that. And that's, a large part of the problem. But I do have to say that if we don't grasp a hold of this and bring this thing to a fairly quick halt, I think we're going to find ourselves on the wrong end of history at some point in the near future. Mark Levin, I'm going to touch on this as we wrap up. We've got about 5 minutes left. Mark Levin has a brand new book out called The Liberty Amendments. And he gave away a few chapters to kind of as a teaser. And it's now out, and it's hit #1 on Amazon, literally overnight. And I'm encouraged by it. One, I have a lot of respect for Mark Levin. He is a constitutional mind, and I believe that he has the right intentions. There are many other hosts that I don't think are quite as constitutionally focused as Mark. And he has, and in this book, he's proposing a new way of thinking. And I would like for Americans of both parties to take a look at this and give it a fair and credible look with an open mind and an open heart. Because what he's talking about is changing the game to put us back into the position of rulership and leadership, completely and diametrically opposed to the leadership or ruling that we see from politicians and these administrative agencies that have run completely amok and such. He's calling for a constitutional reset. And he's doing it in a very intellectual and very lawful manner. And there are certain things that, the Constitution gives us as rights that we've never really utilized before. One of which is that there are actually amendments to the Constitution that can be done by a 3/5 majority of the state legislatures. And a lot of people don't realize that. So if you had a constitutional amendment that said, let's say it's illegal for lobbying to occur and politicians are term limited. Let's just throw those out there, okay? You could never get Congress to vote on that. Why? Well, because it's against their own personal best interest. That's why. So what you can do, however, is you can get a 3/5 majority of the state legislatures who would vote it in as an amendment anyway, and there's not a damn thing Congress can do to rescind it or repeal it. And there's nothing the courts can do to overrule it either. And that shows us a path by which we, the people, as a grassroots organization of individuals, can join together, setting aside our differences, and leaning forward to a common goal can achieve. I'm encouraged by it because not everything he may, and I haven't read the book yet, but I'm intending to get it, but I haven't read it. Not everything that he is going to propose in here is either going to be doable or maybe even a good idea. I don't know. I can only say what I've read, which is very limited. But I do understand some of the principles and the ideas that he's putting forth. And what I find the most valuable about it is that it will give new life and encouragement and recharge the batteries of patriots who are, out of faith. America is frightened, and they are hungry for truth and hungry for honesty and integrity. And they're hungry for a way to regain control without resorting to bloodshed. And I don't blame them. I suspect that this book will be like food to a starving man, water to a thirsty man, relief to a sleepy and overworked and overtired sentry at the gate. Reinforcements are on the way. There's a new approach, a new way to look at this. And if we get together behind some of these ideas, utilizing, his articulations as the catalyst, that we will have an opportunity to, for all intents and purposes, bring ourselves back into a restoration of the constitutional nature of our republic. So I would encourage you to get it. I'm not out there pitching Mark's book. I got nothing. I got no dog in that hunt. But I'm going to, and I think it has some great ideas. Sunsetting all federal departments and agencies, making them explain their reason for existence and things like that. And that stuff's right up my alley. I talk about that all the time. So I'm anxious to read it. I want you to have a great day. Make sure that you get a hold of this if you can, and let's start sharing and expounding on some of these ideas and trying to figure out how we can implement them. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I've been your host this morning. I'm your host every morning. And I would encourage you to find our website and learn more about us. You can find us at americasvoicenow.org. You can send me email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/AmericasVoiceNow. And you can find us on YouTube, where you can see this and every other program that we record, at youtube.com/AmericasVoiceNow. All of those areas are open to you. Please make sure that if you find a program that strikes a nerve for you, forward it on to your friends and ask them to pay attention and maybe come on and watch a couple of others. Let's build this together. Have a great day.